I'll begin by pointing out a peculiar lexical idiosyncrasy of psychoanalysis and psychoanalysis. On one hand, we get very precise and very detailed, and we split over and the use of this word and that word. I mean, in controversial discussions, there's a huge discussion of what is fantasy, and the compromise turns out that somebody will write fantasy with F and somebody with PH in order to sort out and continue their own definitions. And little concepts, internalization, introjection, all these create all kinds of definitional and nosological controversies. So on the one hand, we have this search for precision to use words. On the other hand, we are also somehow vulnerable to or to the allure of abbreviations and acronyms and shortening of words. So the title, for example, of this meeting, when this is the role of paternal in psychoanalysis and culture, it is a kind of a euphemism. Paternal what? Right? So that's my first question that arose when Dr. Mishra, Anurag Mishra asked me to say something. The first question that arose in my mind is the role of paternal what? I mean, obviously we are not talking the role of paternal diet, right? I mean, what my father ate, I suppose, would have some influence on me, or what he drank, most likely the latter, would have more influence on me. But certainly this conference is not about paternal diet, or paternal attire, or vestimentary preferences, culinary preferences, and such. So this kind of abbreviated expression is also a kind of paradoxical stance in psychoanalysis, which on one hand insist upon nosological clarity. So I began to thinking, now one would think, it appears that if you are a reasonably educated person within the field of psychoanalysis, you know exactly what it means. I am trying to become actually a rural general practitioner of psychoanalysis. I would like practice psychoanalysis in Gonda or in Bahraich or some such place. That's my dream. To make psychoanalysis totally disappear, just like the skill of driving. When you're driving a car, you should not know that you're driving a car, right? Mostly, I mean, in Delhi you have to be aware, but in most reasonable places. I mean, I go to work every day driving. Many times I reach my office and I have no idea that I was driving. It's become so procedural. Same way psychoanalysis I am striving for, and I think I'm reasonably there, is so procedural that I don't have to think. That's why I accepted even this invitation to speak. I don't have to think about this, So now the question is paternal what? So we have certainly ruled out paternal diet, paternal vestimentary preferences, and so on and so forth. So within the psychoanalytic lens, I think we end up actually with 4 dimensions of where the paternal could work as an adjective. First would be the role of paternal influence in the history of psychoanalysis. That I think is an important thing, especially because it is supposedly founded by one person who happened to be a male. So now the role of paternal dimension and perspective in the history of psychoanalysis. That I think is a legitimate thing to talk about. The second is the role of paternal input and the role of paternal body and paternal mind and paternal relationship in the course of personality development. I think that's a legitimate topic to talk about. The third is the role of paternal presence or absence or quality or quantity in psychopathology. I think that's a certainly legitimate topic. And finally, the role of paternal voice and the role of paternal mentation in the technique of psychoanalysis. I think those are the 4 legitimate ways that occur to me. I'm sure that others can come up with 2 more or 2 less. I don't know. I'm not another person, I'm just me. So from my mind, those are the 4 ways I would address this matter. when and if asked to, and I'm asked to, so I would say a few things. The role of paternal influence in the psychoanalytic history, the role of paternal body and mind and mentation and role in child development, the role of paternal presence, absence, quality, in and quantity in childhood, in psychopathology, and the role of paternal voice and mentation in psychoanalytic technique. I'm going to leave the first one to the last. So I'm not going to discuss the history aspect. I'll end with it. The reason simply is because I have a very good punchline to end it with. So I'm just kind of a lover of a drama. I'm son of a poet and myself a writer and a poet. So that's the reason why I'll not speak on the first. I'll begin from the second. So let's begin with the second. What is the role of the father and the paternal presence in a personality development? Now, psychoanalysis has started with seduction theory, very soon moved on to Oedipus complex. It was product of a man's mind, and it sort of focused upon a male psychosexual development, largely impacted by the influence of the father. And then these ideas were kind of transposed upon and transposed upon and juxtaposed upon female psychosexual development with disastrous results, I think. But as far as male psychosexual development is concerned, there's some interesting ideas, I think. Now, in development, obviously, early Freud predominantly talks about an intimidating, frightening, castrating father, the influence of which on the boy is ultimately a renunciation of their longing for the mother and the creation of the superego, and therefore lays down both generational boundary, incest boundary, and because nothing can be fully renunciated, therefore a capacity for guilt and a necessity for a certain modicum of guilt, because incestuous longing shall always remain in some corners of the heart, and the overthrow of generational boundaries shall always remain in the corners of the heart, therefore the capacity for generational, for guilt. Now this is Freud, largely, whether you, even if you put it in its most esoteric form in Totem and Taboo, where the murder of the father is prehistoric, or the dissolution of the Oedipus complex, 1924, where the murder is in fantasy and actually the more experienced dimension is that of castration, retaliation and fear rather than the original impulse of overthrowing the father. Now, to this small slice, an important slice of development, the developmental role of the father, more got added later on bit by bit. Among the things that got added were, number one, that the father provides an alternate form of attachment from the very get-go. So it's not only that the father will become important around 18 months, and we'll return to that idea in a minute, but even from the very beginning, that it provides an early attachment. The child's early attachment model is with mother, secure, insecure, anxious, whatever, but there's also an availability to rectify that and also create a new attachment model and an attachment possibility. So, to the Oedipal influence, castrating Oedipal influence of Freud, now we have a father's role as an alternate attachment model. Then we have the father's role as somebody, which is more in Margaret Mahler's work, an agency, a person, a mind, an executive ego, which separates the child from the mother. And this is best summarized in an old Mexican saying, which says that when a baby is born, the mother should take the baby in arms and say, "Look baby, this is the world." And the father should hold the baby's finger, take him on top of the mountain and say, "Look, that is the world." So there is a separation from the mother, cutting the umbilical cord, so to speak, and expanding the symbiotic orbit, and cutting the child, taking the child out of the symbiotic orbit between mother and infant, and then introducing the child to external reality. So we have this one at the Oedipal situation. 2, the alternate attachment model. 3, the separation from the mother. 4, the introduction to external reality, a greater reality focus. And then, furthermore, by renouncing a vis-a-vis boy and girl a different role, by playing a gender-specific, era-specific, culture-specific male role in the house and in the society, the father provides the boy with an identification model of consolidation of gender roles, not gender identity, gender role, and by renouncing intimate contact with the girl's body. And for example, let's say a 5-year-old girl is changing clothes and is completely naked, 6-year-old girl, and father opens the door by mistake, and there is the girl, and the father closes the door. She says, okay, I'll send mommy in, or something. In that closing of the door, there is a paradoxical intensification of the erotic mystery of the girl's body. So the father, by moving away from the girl's body, but retaining contact with the eye, and that is the fundamental basis of the beauty imperative in the female body, to keep the father's gaze involved. So I think that the Oedipal situation, the attachment situation, the separation situation, the external reality situation, and then the consolidation of gender-related roles, both in boys and girls, differently. One with involvement, one with detachment. 5, and then 6 is the giving of one's body. Now we know from developmental studies that the mother's body is used by a growing child, regardless of male or female, for entirely different purposes than the father's body is. The mother's body, as we know, is used mainly for nourishment and for haven. But the father lends his body too, because all of you have been children, I have been a child. You recall your experiences with your father when you were 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. You will find your involvement with the father's body. And the involvement with the father's body is not for nourishment and not for haven. The involvement with the father's body is for play, horseplay, and play of various varieties. Riding on his shoulders, riding on his back, being thrown up in the air, rotated in the air. So one is around play, and the second is around testing of aggression. So for example, this arm wrestling, this is more with father than with the mother. Even if the child entices and seduces the mother to play this game, it's not really her game, it's daddy's game, to see who's more strong, or who can throw the frisbee or the ball farther. And especially the father at times will tell the child to hit him. The father will say, come on, show me, here, hit me. The child goes like this. Father said, that's all you've got? Son hits like this. Father said, that's it? He says, no, hit me harder. Now by this, what is the father teaching the child? The father is teaching the child 2 very crucial messages. One, that look, you can be aggressive. You can be aggressive, but your aggression is not going to kill me. I can handle it. You can hit it. See, I'm still here. You can be aggressive and you can be nasty. I'm not going to die. That's one thing. And therefore the father is teaching the child a lesson that it is okay to be assertive in this world. It's okay to ask. It's okay to do what you need to do. The world will not fall apart. One. Secondly, by letting the child identify with his resilience, with his fortitude, the child is also saying, you will be hit one day and you will not fall apart. See, just the way I'm not falling apart. Right? And then, because most societies, rightly or wrongly, are still patriarchal, therefore the 7th task of the father is to give a Welton Shuang, a purpose of the family to the family. What are we about? What are the Ahujas about? What are the Nagpals about? What are the Kakkars about? What are the Akhtars about? The last one, I suppose, should be better left unspoken. Or some aspects of it can be spoken, but some are better not spoken. But the point is that this is the complex developmental role. The Oedipal role, the attachment role, the separating from mother role, the introducing to external reality role, the consolidation of gender roles differently in boys and girls, and the giving of the body for regulation of aggression in the child, and learning horseplay and executive play, and finally giving the family orientation and family purpose, to which the child will attach, detach, and then come back and reconcile midway. This is the main developmental perspective. So this is one point I wanted to make. Paternal role in child development and personality consolidation. Point one. It was actually point number two. I'll come back to the one. That's history of psychoanalysis. This second point that I want to make about the father's situation is about psychopathology. Now, if the father is completely absent, the child will create a father through fantasy, through movies, through mythology, through Chanda Mama, if such a thing still exists, to children's stories, through video games, to Bollywood movies, through historical references, through neighborhood. The child, through school, the child will create a father. But the difficulty that happens is if the father is absent, either because of death, or because of divorce, or desertion, or abandonment of the family, and the child grows up without a physical presence of the father, the imaginary created father is then internalized. But the difference that becomes is the difference between eating a hamburger and eating a very, very beautiful photograph of hamburger. That what happens is that the father that is internalized, that is imaginary, and by necessity, because the father is not there every day, cannot be de-idealized. And the idealization also has a gauzy quality because it's not built around real knowledge. So the internalized structure becomes gauzy. Both the superego, and gauzy means soft, unreal, implausible, and potentially malleable, and the ego ideal remains unachievable because it's not de-idealized. And one becomes then addicted to a dream of what one has to become, and sometimes it becomes externalized and one becomes addicted to Otto Kernberg, or some people get addicted to Lacan. One of them is more fortunate than the other, but I would not mention which one, so that kind of thing can happen. And then hopefully one has to then have a de-idealization dual, and through that murder of the father, then resurrect the father and have some more real flesh and blood in it. So what is and actually, you'll be interested to know that among the first analysts in this country, or from this country, in this country there is the Shekhar Bose, certainly, but from this country, among the first analysts, one was Masood Khan, who had some very, very interesting contributions, but also some very troubling personal traits and troubling personal behaviors. But an early psychoanalyst was a Sardarji from I think Ludhiana, Harwant Singh Gill. Harwant Singh Gill has written a very, very important paper on absent father and the effect of absent father. It is on the web, I think early 60s or maybe 50s. It's an international journal of psychoanalysis, and he's written other papers also. Unfortunately, he became ill and died very young. But so Harwant Singh Gill's paper, and then later on, of course, the work of John Munder Ross and Stanley Cath and James Herzog on father hunger and so on and so forth. So one set of psychopathologies emerges from an absent father. Another set of psychopathologies emerges from a sociopathic father. Now, a sociopathic father is a very problematic thing for a boy's development, because it's like if your father is sociopathic and committing incest, is philanderer, is cheater, liar, embezzler, and a totally unreliable person, then that father is also your role model, and your superego then becomes filled with what Zurich and Johnson call superego lacunae, big holes, of behavior that appear completely normal to you, which are actually quite hurtful to others and ultimately to yourself. Now, this situation of having a sociopathic father is a very bad prognostic indicator for psychotherapeutic or psychoanalytic treatment for a man, because psychoanalysis takes you towards identification. And here identification is taking you towards pathology. So this is a very big problem. That means that this analysis would lead to a major disidentification with the father, and that will cause a developmental pain and developmental problem, and therefore a problem of either or conflict and or disloyalty and disaffiliation. And one will have to create a extra familiar allegiances and extra familiar loyalties, etc., etc., and mourn the fact that one's father was actually not idealizable and usable as a father. Then a third psychopathology, of course, is of a cruel father. You know, if a father rubs the authority and rubs the edible prerogative much early and very harshly, then the child becomes rebellious, and on one surface the child may bear and may comply and become negatively edible and submissive, and may not be able to have an out and open battle with the father, but the desire for that battle will remain. And under the overt negative edible submission, that desire will remain, and sooner or later will pop out. Most likely during middle age. Most likely during middle age, when what happens is, when you become, I mean, like you guys, many of you, you can multiply your age by 3 and you will still be alive. I am 68 years old, and if I multiplied my age by 2, that's 136. Now, if you think that I'm going to be alive at 136, I think you need some antipsychotic medication, and I think you need to consult Dr. Anurag Mishra for that. But the important thing is, when a person reaches a time when you realize that more of your life is over and less is left, that is when whatever important material that is repressed more actively and urgently wants to come out and be accounted for. And a child who has been dominated by a cruel father and has entered into a negative edible constellation of girlish submission to the father will now rebel. You know, it may not be possible with a very difficult father, and in a certain patriarchal culture to do so during adolescence, which happens in more open cultures. It may happen much later, this kind of thing. And then finally there's a weak and ineffective father, which has kind of midway effect of absent father and cruel father, because the father is unable to give what the son needs, degree of executive skill with dealing with the world, and of being protected from an engulfing maternal principle and such. So that a lot of psychopathology can evolve with the father's intensity, with the father's presence, with the father's absence, with its dominating father, with a cruel father, with a weak father, and very importantly with an absent father. So this is the second piece. The third piece has to do with technique. In the technique, I think most explicitly actually, the person who has written this, I think you guys have had him here. I don't know whether you have had him here or not had him. If not, I strongly recommend. He's one of the finest thinkers we have, a very fine teacher, Kenneth Wright. Now, Kenneth Wright has most explicitly stated it. But the fact is, this material and this idea in unnamed ways has always been present. And that is that we have two kinds of listenings. We have a listening of a credulous nature, listening in which we give the conscious and pre-conscious material much greater weight, and we stay with the surface, and expand the surface and render the convey to the patient that the patient's experience is valid, patient's experience is sane, the patient's experience makes sense in a certain perspective, and so on and so forth. Once we have done that, from that kind of listening emerge affirmative dimensions. So for example, if you have had a fight with your boss, you come to my office and you say, I had a fight with my boss, I'm very upset. The first principle of credulous listening would be for me to ask, what happened? Tell me what took place. And then you say, I went and I said this and he said this, and you say, yes, I know. I mean, I think what you're describing does seem very hurtful. You see, this is all credulous. Or I can imagine why you would be upset by being called a little girl, while you have done PhD from Delhi University and you're an educated woman or something, and your boss said, you listen, girl, I know you are upset about it, and you should be. It makes a certain kind of sense to me. Exactly. Now you are listening credulously, and you're talking in a affirmative manner. Then you can also add, of course, this your boss is calling you girl, while you are a serious scholar of anthropology and you have a PhD degree and you have written a book, and he addresses you as a girl. Of course it hurts your feeling. And I know you have told me that your father also used to call you sometimes baby, even in front of your friends, and that's was very annoying to you, that nobody is letting you grow up and be a woman. I can imagine that this will be your understanding. Please understand, this comment, even the linking with the father, is not an interpretation, because this is all conscious. This is all, patient knows this, you know this. The first is conscious, that the boss called you a girl and you're upset. The fact that your father called you a baby in front of 20 people, that's pre-conscious. It can come to your conscious in a minute. So this conscious and pre-conscious handling is entirely about credulous listening and affirmative interventions. 25 minutes in the session, or maybe not in that session, maybe in next session, the material will shift, and now that material will come. That material will come which has to do with what you do not know. What you do not know, and maybe what even I do not know. And we will find something very surprising, that maybe this fight was actually started by you. That you will stumble, because the repressed has a continuous pressure in the upward direction of conscious. As we keep talking, you will stumble, and from the unconscious, the repressed material will come through a derivative. And you might end up making a slip of tongue, by which it might be revealed that actually you had somehow called the boss something which incited him to call you a girl. That surprised both of us. And then we will enter into a skeptical listening mode, where the story now will become different. And the material now will be processed in a different way by the analyst and speak in an interpretive mode. That it is interesting that when you went there, you brought him 2 candies. I thought this was a serious academic meeting of your tenure, and for you to bring him a rasgulla on a plate, what did you think you were trying to do? By this, now a new thing began to, you never told me about this rasgulla thing in the beginning. Now we are finding out that you are already acting childish and inviting him to hurt you, because now we begin to find out that you are guilty at asking for your promotion to be associate professor, because your mother never became an associate professor and she retired at the assistant professor level. So and now more and more stuff will begin to come up. And in your department there has been a rumor that your associate professor was having an affair with your chairman. So now if you become an associate professor, maybe you can have an affair with chairman. Maybe daddy will sleep with you and make you pregnant anyway, right? So shit now begins to appear. So what was affirmative and credulous now changes into a skeptical and interpretive. And the analyst's voice changes. What was one and one joined dual unity of credulousness, mother-child symbiosis, has now become into the separation of the father and child. Right? This is the principle that we are talking about in technique, which Kenneth Wright very explicitly says that Winnicott is like a mother and Freud is like a father. And the Winnicottian holding is a maternal work, and the Freudian interpretation is a paternal work. Right? And all analysts mostly oscillate between these two extremes, more so, perhaps more in the beginning, and at the end of the session we are more maternal. Maybe at the time of crisis we are more maternal. Maybe for the first 20 minutes we are more maternal. But ultimately the analysis is about both principles, maternal principle and paternal principle. By paternal principle, what we mean is skeptical listening and incisive and interpretive and unmasking interventions. Also, in the frame there is mother and father built in, and that is to begin the session in time, exactly on time, is maternal principle. That means the baby opens their eyes and finds their mommy. Because we are mammals. God has promised us a mother. And therefore, the mother must be there as the baby arrives. Therefore, any session where the analyst is late and the patient arrives first is never has the same quality. The analyst must be there when the patient arrives. Sometimes mistakes happen. That's not, we are not machines, but the session changes in flavor. Patient comes, the analyst there. Patient comes, the analyst there. That is the maternal aspect. The paternal aspect is to end the session in time. That means, listen, you and me, we have had good time, we are working together, blah, blah, blah. Now, go to your job. Go to your university. Well, this internal indulgence is over, now you go work. Right? So that is ending the session as a paternal principle. So far I have said something about development, something about psychopathology, and something about technique. Now, as I promised you, that I'll say something about the history of psychoanalysis and the role of paternal perspective in that. Psychoanalysis was sort of, we can say, people say invented. I think that's a little too much strong. I think it was put together, let's put it this way. It was put together by Freud around 1899. I mean, the book Interpretation of Dreams came out in 1900, but movement towards psychoanalysis has already begun in studies in hysteria in 1895 or so. Now, Freud lived till 1939. He was a strong, intimidating, stoic, and authoritarian figure who treated his disciples as children, and Jung, Adler, Rank, Steckel, all the early disciples and proto-disciples, Victor Tosk, all these people he treated as if they were boys. And when the boys, and he admired having a smart boys, please understand, I have a son, very smart, very, he knows everything. He knows everything. Now, it is a tedium for a father to accommodate two bright children, even though wanting bright children, you see. So these people were very bright, and some of them were very, very bright. Now, Freud liked brightness till the time their brightness matched his brightness and confirmed his bright ideas. And if they could prove what he had thought in a newer way, he loved it. But the problem is that brightness already means, and intelligence already means seeing new things. And two human beings are not same. And therefore, smart people will see different things. And some of his pupils began to say different things. Like Adler, long ago, before Freud came in 1920 to find aggressive instinct or death instinct, Adler had proposed that there is an aggressive instinct, which Freud poo-pooed because he had not thought of it yet. Same way, Jung, I think, had some very interesting and good ideas about the shift of male and female identifications during middle age and about the identity. I think even the idea of collective unconscious, I think, has some weight, and a bunch of things, right? I think Rank had some very good ideas, and so did Ferenczi. Even Ferenczi, who had full of ideas, was ultimately thrown out of by Freud. So Freud ran this enterprise of psychoanalysis as if it was his thing, like Colonel Sanders' Kentucky Fried Chicken. Now, you know, there's a brand name to it. And actually, that's why the International Journal of Psychoanalysis got called International Journal. It's not owned by IPA, it's owned by the British Psychoanalytic Society, because Ernest Jones was in England and Freud was in Vienna. So what are they going to call? He wanted an English language journal. They had to call it an international journal. Partly also because British think that they own the world anyway, and not wrongly so, they did at that time. So Freud ran this whole operation of psychoanalysis as not only a science, but as a business enterprise, as a name brand thing, which I think harmed the second generations and made some people leave, some left on their own, and some were thrown out and considered heretics, such as Harry Stack Sullivan, Clara Thompson, Eric Fromm, the culturalists, If they emphasized culture, they were thrown out. If they got into spirituality and mysticism, like Jung, they were thrown out. If anybody was interested in Eastern ideas, they were thrown out, and so on and so forth. Too many therapeutic and technical experimentations, Ferenczi, and those kinds of things that he wanted to dictate what psychoanalysis was. There was some legitimacy to that kind of paternal authoritarianism, but really not. And ultimately what happened was that it led to a profound negative Oedipal identification in psychoanalysts with the father. And psychoanalysts became good boys. And good boys are sweet and interesting and for a while, but ultimately boring and uncreative. You cannot be creative if you're a good boy. You have to stretch the tether of identification. You can't break it, because then you've gone into a different tradition. Either you become non-analyst or you become something else. You have to stretch the tether. Take the model and the paradigm as far as it will go, and add to new things to it and such. So this thing didn't happen. I think for example, North American psychoanalysis, I believe, till late 60s, nothing happened. There was one book by Leo Stone, Psychoanalytic Situation. I think Greenson's book on technique, that's it. All other work in American psychoanalysis till 60s were good boy, good girl papers, proving Papa right. It was with Kohut, Kernberg, Mahler, Stern, all these things, BB, all this new stuff has begun in late 60s. The Kernberg's papers, Borderline Personality Organization, 1967, Mahler's papers, 68, book, Mahler, Pine and Bergman, 1975, Kohut, Analysis of the Self, 71, Restoration of the Self, 77, Daniel Stern's book, The Interpersonal World of the Infant, all major developments, and later by Fonagy and the contemporary Kleinius, all major developments have happened after 60 in North America. North America became completely a negative Oedipal identification. So that is the paternal history of psychoanalysis, which has caused that amount of paternal authoritarianism, has caused some harm. Because some people became, quotes, only Kleinian, some people became only Winnicottian and such, which is, I don't think it's a good thing, because Freud had given us some very good stuff and it can all be kept together and synthesized. Let me conclude by saying an important thing and funny thing and so witty and so nice that I wish I had said it, but I have not. This comment was made by Stefano Bolognini, who is the current president of IPA, and at the risk of it appearing as flattery, the fact is that it's a rare thing that the president of IPA is also a very good analyst and very good writer. In one of his books, Secret Passages, at one place Bolognini says, time has come that we should stop calling Freud the father of psychoanalysis. Because to call Freud the father of psychoanalysis is a huge insult, not only to people who have followed Freud and have added very significant things, Winnicott, Bion, Andre Green, and I'm specifically right now naming men, Andre Green, Bion, Winnicott, Kohut, Kernberg, and such, that not only have the generation, the sons, added to psychoanalysis, and to keep calling Freud the father is to do both harms. One, to devalue the son's work, and one, to devalue the father himself, because you are saying that the father never had any productive and fertile sons, and that's not a good compliment to a father. And therefore, Stefano Bolognini suggests, and I end this with this line, the time has come that we stop calling Freud the father of psychoanalysis and take a firm oath to start calling him the grandfather of psychoanalysis. Thank you very much.